This is Tennessee Talks with United States Congressman Tim Burchett.
Hello, I'm Congressman Tim Burchett, and I want to welcome everybody to this episode of Tennessee Talks. I'm really proud to be joined by my good buddy Chip Roy. He's from the 21st Congressional District, and it's really an honor having you here, brother. Thank you.
It's my honor.
I'm supposed to offer brief thoughts on working with you, but I don't know if I could keep it brief. I've tried to. I watch you on the floor when you speak, and some people have just a whole written out thing and they just follow it word for word, and I've watched you where I always say people a prepared prayer is kind of like a prepared speech. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily always speak from the heart, and I always watch you and you just get up there and rail. And I dig that. I think that's a real talent. And I guess you have a law degree and all that, but I think it goes to much deeper because it's you express the views of your district, obviously, because they've sent you back like mine did.
Well, if I'd say one thing on that point, when Congress started, I believe I'm correct. I need to research some more thoroughly. It was a rule of the House that you couldn't use prepared remarks because they wanted to encourage debate and engagement. And I hope the body will move in that direction a little bit. But mostly because it's real.
Yeah, it is real. And this caged or planned stuff is just garbage, and it's a waste of our time. Yep. And it drives me crazy because you argue these 2,000-page bills and they hit the one or 2 points, but there's a myriad of others that are just hidden in there that nobody discusses, and I think that's by design. It infuriates people like me and you, but it keeps the people in power.
Well, you're too modest. You're one of the few members here that I think has a direct finger on the pulse of our constituents across the board, but particularly obviously those who sent us here, and know how to speak for them, and your constituents are lucky to have you here.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate you saying that. But a lot of East Tennesseans are really just ticked off about what's going on our southern border, and I hear you speak on it because you're a Texan, and you speak that language well. And I was wondering, a member from the border state, if you could share some things with our folks in Tennessee and back home, just how it directly impacts you all and the people you represent.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, and obviously, what impacts Texas impacts Tennessee. We're kind of connected at the hip historically, and I think also ideologically, a lot of similarities. And what we see in Texas is really just the front lines of what the entire country is seeing, right? And we're just taking it on the chin with open borders. But just to put it all in perspective, I represent Central Texas, but the southwest flank gets about 100-ish miles from the border in Del Rio. That is obviously where the event occurred last fall, right, with the Haitians coming across or in the river. Now, mind you, we met with Secretary Mayorkas the other day, and I asked him the question, hey, have you apologized to those, Border Patrol agents that you accused of whipping human beings in the river? And he said, well, that's still under investigation. That's not my call. I mean, not your call.
What investigation? I have horses, and I remember my wife, she called me right when that picture, she said, honey, that guy's got the reins. And sure enough, there was a second picture. You could see from the back, it was clear. The guy was not whipping the guy.
And he's hiding behind bureaucratic processes. I'm like, those two human beings work for you. Yeah. Have their back, man. And that's a metaphor for what's actually going on at the border, right? We've got, the reality is these are human beings that are being used as political pawns by our Democratic colleagues. That's the truth. Because you've got 8,000 people a day coming across the border. That's the truth right now, 8,000 a day. If you look at March, we had 217,000 apprehensions. Now, that's not counting. So for Tennesseans, just understand, that's not counting the gotaways. Okay, right. That's just the people who come and are apprehended either because we find them or because they, frankly, most of them just turn themselves in. Right. Now, take a step back. What is actually the problem? We have a provision in our law and our border. It's illegal to come here, across the border without, papers and go, come in with a visa and so forth. It's illegal. But what we have is asylum laws that give an exception, the ability to claim asylum, but you have to present credible fear. It wasn't meant to be the exception that swallows the border security rule.
Now, do they actually tell them? I've heard that some folks even walk across with a piece of paper that says exactly what they're supposed to say, and then they
100%, and that's coming from United Nations, that's coming from NGOs, and it's coming from the cartels. Right. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand who don't see it, is the extent to which this is all organized, and the cartels have operational control of our border. You cannot cross, for the most part, if you don't pay $3,000 to $5,000 or a lot higher to cross the river. So let's think about it. You come here, you pay that money, you get to the river. Now, but I don't have $5,000. Well, what they'll tell you is, just the other night, I can show you a video where they were crossing and talked to them in Spanish, and they said, yeah, we pay $3,000 to $5,000. I don't have it, but I'll be on a monthly plan. They're going to be on a monthly plan. And then if you can't do that, then they're going to put you in a stash house, and then they're going to put you into the labor trade. They're going to put you in the sex trafficking trade. But when we're dealing with the problem at the border, you've got a current administration that is allowing that asylum rule to govern who comes across, and then they do no enforcement. And the only enforcement that they've had in place for the 15, 16 months of the Biden administration is what we call Title 42,
right?
Which is the provision in our health codes that allows us to turn people away if they have a communicable disease or that they might have a communicable disease.
So during COVID, we're basically not testing. We're letting them in, and that's basically the bottom line.
Well, and importantly, that provision empowers Border Patrol to be able to say, no, you can't come across, we're turning you away. Now, there's some exceptions, and they've been allowing family members to come in more than, frankly, they probably should. But they've turned away most of the single adult males under Title 42. Let me put this in perspective. Last year, we had about 2 million apprehensions. 700,000 individuals were released into the United States. 700,000 released into the United States, allegedly to come back to a hearing, but that won't happen for the most part. The other 1.3 million, most were turned away under Title 42. Now in March, when I was talking about 217,000 apprehensions, about 110,000 of those were turned away under Title 42. So what happens on May 23rd when they turn away and they repeal Title 42? Well, those numbers swell. Border Patrol testified to us the other day. Those numbers be 10 to 18,000. That's 300,000 a month, and we're not turning any away. You do the math. Yeah. It ain't good.
Well, tell me, what do you think of this administration? I mean, they've admitted that it's going to swell the rolls. What is their ultimate goal in this? It almost just seems anarchy, social design. You know, everybody calls you a conspiracy theorist, but what else is there? I mean, they're wrecking our economy. They're wrecking our energy independence. And now, of course, immigration. It's just we can't educate the folks. We can't feed the folks. Our jails are swelling. You know, we've had numerous deaths because of this. We've got human trafficking. We've got the fentanyl issue. I mean, the amount of fentanyl that could fit, you know, on a match head could kill every member of Congress. And yet there is no. You can't even get a bill heard on fentanyl right now because I think it admits their mistake and their error and all this. So what do you think is their end game?
So there are a number of different things that I think are driving our Democratic colleagues to not actually secure the border. Crass politics is part of it, right? They believe, and frankly, I think they miscalculate that everybody who's brown is going to vote for them. I think they're making a mistake, and I can tell you in South Texas, that's flipping. Side note, Mayor of McAllen is now Republican. Zapata County in South Texas along the Rio Grande voted for a Republican, Donald Trump, last year for the first time in 100 years.
Yep.
So I think they're taken for granted brown, quote unquote, votes. I don't like those terminologies, but they use it.
They use it.
But here's what I think it's worse than crass politics. It's actually worse, Tim. I actually think that it's that they don't believe in sovereignty. I think it's that they believe in a fluid sort of world order where people can come and go in whatever interest for them. And so when you and I I know you're a man of faith, and I know how much your family means to you, and you go to the border and you do as I've done and talk to these people, human beings, little girl, 7-year-old little girl. I got a picture of her on my phone. I don't use it politically, but she was this beautiful little girl, and she had a phone number on her arm, and she was by herself, and she'd come up from Honduras, and she was going to try to find her mama in, I think, Colombia or somewhere in South Carolina. And I talked to her in my broken Spanish. I talked to the other guys there, and I said, well, she by herself? And this guy said, yeah, I ran across her in the middle of Mexico. And he's like a probably 15-year-old guy. It looked like he was trying to actually help her. But this is what's happening. These are human beings. I don't begrudge them wanting to come to America.
No, I don't either. Neither do I.
But we're allowing them to get endangered in this sort of false name of open borders and in the crass politics of our Democratic colleagues.
It seems like it is a one world government type situation that they're moving towards. I always sit there and I think when I talk to my colleagues, I think, well, what if I'm wrong? but I can't find any instance on this where I am wrong, because it's just total lunacy.
Can I just say what I said about to your constituents and about you're such a humble guy and a pulse on the. That's the right question. I ask it all the time, right? I voted last week, and I don't know how you voted, so it's not a comparison. I voted last week on a tough vote, right, on the sanctioning Russia with the trade vote, because it had a human rights provision in there that was going to be real vague and allow our government, empowered the executive to go after people for whatever reason. And so then all these people say, oh, you're pro-Putin, you're all saying. So I take a step back and I go, well, am I wrong, right? I mean, these votes matter. But then I calculated everything and I reached a conclusion that I thought I was right. Of course, now we're fixing the bill a little bit. It's going to be better this afternoon, and now we'll vote on it. That's how this place is supposed to work.
It is supposed to work.
But you asked the right question, and I don't think a lot of our colleagues do that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I want to get back on the fentanyl issue.
Yeah.
I have a bill that's, if you basically these mules that are not necessarily the mules, people that are trafficking it puts a life sentence on. I can't even get a blink out of our Democrat colleagues on that, and they're intentionally trafficking fentanyl. We know how harmful. We know it comes from China, most of it. I can see there's instances where it's come over the Canadian border, but the vast majority of it comes from China, goes around Central America, comes in through our southern border of Mexico, and yet we don't seem to want to lock it down or admit we've got a problem. I talked to a guy when I presented this bill. You put the customary press release out and you try to get some internet buzz, and of course the major media is not going to cover it because they'd have to admit there's a failure at our southern border and just ignore it. But I talked to a fella in South Carolina because he asked me if I knew the congressman from there, and I said, yeah. And I said, he's a good man, He said, well, I said, well, call him and tell him to support the bill, and he did. But he told me his son had died from fentanyl. He said, but the interesting thing was they found the capsule or the pill still in his mouth. And it was a bootleg of they were literally just pressing out pills,
Xanax
it was Xanax. Yeah. It was Xanax because he had some mental issues and he allegedly couldn't get to the pharmacy. The father's stuff. It was just a horrible situation. But the pill was still in his mouth, and it was that strong. And you're hearing about that. I mean, they're lacing weed with it, marijuana, cocaine, every drug out there is being laced with it. And a lot of these drug dealers, what they do is they put it out, and then they know it's going to kill somebody, and it's like their calling card, or it's how they advertise it. Wow, this guy's got this. That's how really strong it is. So they get it, and then they know to cut it, but they know how strong it is, and it's a better value for them, I guess. And that's how ruthless these people are. But we cannot seem to get anything through dealing with this. And I know, my libertarian sense is that, well, you open it up and just let it go, but it's past that with this fentanyl, and I don't understand why we don't get any kind of Democrat leadership will not allow anything about it through. Is it because they're going to have to admit the situation there, you think?
I think that's a big part of it, and I think, to your point about the libertarian sensibility, look, I've got some impulses that says, look, Colorado wants to legalize weed. Fire it up. I don't know why the feds need to go interfere with them. However, right, the dominoes that fall from that in a world in which cartels right now are making literally hundreds of millions of dollars moving human beings for profit, moving now fentanyl, which what are you going to do, legalize fentanyl? This stuff just like a sugar pack out of it would kill, like you said, this whole floor.
Yeah.
But here's the thing with fentanyl. You said it, right, the one with the pill in there. We had a University of Texas football star, the other UT, who you might remember Sam Ellinger, who was our starting quarterback. His brother, Jake, he died last year, we believe, from Xanax laced with fentanyl. I've had numerous stories. You saw this West Point story down in Florida, right? And then one guy's like trying to do CPR and then dies because he tried to do CPR. Then we had that same situation with an EMT in Austin, and they get a call and they're freaking out. By the time they got there, the second person was dead because they were trying CPR. Like, people don't understand what's actually happening and how dangerous this stuff is. And the DEA put out a nationwide alert yesterday, warning about mass deaths as a result of fentanyl for these very reasons. So, yes, we should do more on this. We should recognize. Remember that remember in the 80s, the cocaine? Remember when Len Bias died, the rising star from University of Maryland, the Celtics?
Kid from my high school was his roommate.
Okay. And so, those guys, we were all freaking out over cocaine deaths. It was about 10,000 a year. Last year, 100,000 Americans died from overdoses driven heavily by synthetics and by opioids and the fentanyl epidemic cooked in labs, or starting in China, coming up through our cartels, and cooked in labs in Mexico, where they're making these Xanax knockoffs or Adderall and these things, and it's killing thousands of Americans. We got to do something about it.
And they press them. They look just like
Yep.
They
look like the real deal.
They look like the real deal. Well, I know on March 16th, change gears a little bit, you wrote a letter urging every member of the House, and you referred to Mayorkas, I believe that's how you say his name. You urged us to the Republican conference, or the caucus, as I like to call it. Conference is what they call it up here. But to support the impeachment of the Department of Homeland Security and I've publicly called on him to resign.
Sure.
But we've already talked a lot about his problems. But could you share some other examples of Secretary Mayorkas's failings at his job?
So some of our peers rightfully question and say, okay, well, is this a high crime and misdemeanor? And I believe it is, because I think if you go back and study what a high crime and misdemeanor is, the breach of the public trust, failure to actually carry out your duty. In fact, maladministration was considered, but they went to the more known term of high crime and misdemeanor, which included maladministration. So what has he done here? He's failed to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. He doesn't enforce the Secure Fence Act, which is law to say build the wall. He's allowing pieces of the fence to rust in fields in Texas. He's paying contractors not to build it. He's not enforcing the laws with ICE. We had 25,000 arrests by ICE internally in the United States last year. Do you know how many we had at the peak under Trump? 250,000. Like that tells. So where are all those criminals going, right? He's allowing Border Patrol to get overwhelmed. He refuses to use Title 42. He is not even using migrant protection protocols, which is our return to Mexico policies, where he's under a federal court order. A judge in Texas said, hey, dude, you got to go follow the law on this. And he's like, oh, okay, well, they put out a memo saying we want to get rid of it, but I guess we got to pretend, and basically ignoring the laws. He's empowering cartels, allowing Americans to die. He's not being forthright with the American people. I don't even think it's a close call. And if you don't send a signal that our secretaries have to respond to Congress and say, you have a job to do, you literally are ignoring your duty under the Constitution to secure the border. It's like what I said about the Haitian, the Border Patrol agents. When I asked him this week, he's like, well, as I said, they're doing a report on this. Dude, they work for you. It's your job. This is on your watch. You're the Secretary of Homeland Security. Secure the daggum border.
Seems to be the first and foremost. That buzzer you heard, I think, is they're calling us to vote. So I want to ask you one last thing quickly. We ask all our folks this that have come on here. Do you have any questions of me?
Well, my favorite things to talk to you about are your family. You are so proud of your dad and so proud of your family. It's just one of my favorite things to talk about. And I just, wonder I want to say this carefully, but what would your daddy, as you call him, think about what's happening now and what he fought for and what he fought for this country? What would he be thinking?
I think he'd be disgusted. I can remember, I always think about this story. We were eating pizza in our living room. It was on election night, and the elections were not going our way. And my daddy, and we say the blessing, one of us does. It was just me and him. We'd work the polls all day. I can't remember if I was in the state legislature at the time. I can't remember where I was, House or Senate. But I remember Daddy praying. It was a real simple prayer, and he said, Lord, please just don't let us lose our country. And I think about that every day. I lay awake at night. I think, we are on the cusp of losing our country. You hear that, but the reality is we are with inflation, with just this cavalier attitude towards issues that normally, spending, and I mean, our children are under attack. The top female swimmer in the world now is a man. I mean, it's just not rational, and it's just flipped on its ear just so quick. And he'd shake his head in disgust right now, and he'd do a lot of praying because he did. Daddy fought in the Second World War, and he didn't have to go, and Mama flew an airplane, and my wife's a patriot. My daughter's biological father, who's passed away, was a Navy man, and it's just sometimes I feel overwhelmed, actually, of what we're up against.
I do too, and I appreciate what you just said. I just don't want to lose this country. I can tell you when I went through cancer, as you know, a decade ago, and I thought I was done with public service. I'd served. I'd worked as a prosecutor. I'd worked in the United States Senate, and but I recommitted after I had gone through that to keep fighting for this country, because I looked at my kids. My daughter was 4 months old. My son wasn't even 2 years old. And I just told my wife, I said, I'm on this planet to go fight to try to save this country. And that's what it's for. I can't go watch. I was watching the 6th episode of Band of Brothers last night. Love that series. Yeah. My roommate, I've got a roommate when I'm here in D.C., and we started watching it a couple days ago, and you just keep watching. Anyway, I watched that, and I watched what they did, and I think about what they did, and the real guys. I mean, these are real stories. Yeah. And your dad, and my granddad, and those that did this. I'm not going to let them have our country. That's why we're here. Yeah. They don't get to have it.
They don't get
we
it.
Do.
We do.
And we're going to be prayerful. Revival works. We know that the Lord is in charge, and we're all here just kind of renting space. But we're going to keep fighting for freedom, and I love doing it alongside you.
Well, if you get the opportunity, watch the one called Pacific.
That's next.
Well, that's my dad's outfit, and actually a guy wrote a book called With the Old Breed at Peleliu in Okinawa, and that was written. The movie or the series follows it, and there's a guy named E.B. Sledge, who's one of the key players in there, and he was a friend of my daddy's. I can remember him calling the house. He was a mortarman on Peleliu, and Daddy was a demolition engineer, or combat engineer, they called it. And so they were both in the mess, the worst part of it, of Peleliu and Okinawa. So if you get a chance, watch that. That's a plug for that.
I will.
I don't agree with Steven Spielberg on anything.
But he did that one right.
But he did those two right. Yep. He sure did. And I'd hug his neck if I saw him. But anyway, hey, folks, I'm Tim Burchett, and I want to thank y'all for listening to another episode of Tennessee Talks. This has been one of my favorite ones. So thank you, Chip. Thank you for being my friend.
Yep. God bless
you for
too.
serving. God has blessed me. Thank y'all for watching.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Tennessee Talks. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep up with Congressman Burchett by following @Rep Tim Burchett on Twitter and Instagram, and @Congressman Tim Burchett on Facebook and YouTube.